Welcome back, Affinity Designers. Today we're going to look at a design style by Jon Klassen that he uses in the book Extra Yarn by Mac Barnett. We'll use the tools in Affinity Designer to try to replicate some of the style. Let's go ahead and jump in. I'm starting by rasterizing this knitting fabric I found on the internet, and I'm going to jump over to the photo persona in order to manipulate this file. So just click up there on those pixels up in the left-hand corner. And what we got to do is first we're going to cut this in half and paste it just to have two separate files, each half of the original size. So I've got those two on my layers panel. I'm going to separate this out just so we can play around with it a little bit. The next step is to get the eraser tool. I want a nice soft brush, so really soft edge. You can even drop opacity if you like. And oops, I'm just going to start by erasing one edge and kind of want to leave it a little rough. So I'm going to make it larger and drop the hardness down a little bit so the edge is a little soft, and drop the opacity down as well. And just make a little pass. There you go. And I'm going to move that side to the opposite edge where it originally was, and we'll grab those two different swatches right there. But the idea is to overlap the rightmost photo fragment with the faded edge so that you can't really tell. And if I wanted to spend a lot of time, I could do make this almost perfect. But for now, this is just for purposes of demonstration. You can spend more time if you wish. But the idea is that it looks like a seamless, uninterrupted pattern. And we'll explain why we do this in a second. So once I've got that done, I'm going to select both those layers and group them, Command-G or Control-G, and then I have to right-click and rasterize them. So now they're back to being one single image. So we can do the next step. Step 4 is to do the same thing, but this time vertically. So I'll slice it vertically, fade one edge, and then overlap it again on the bottom this time in order to create that. What that has done is the outside edges are now matching on all sides so that when this tiles, it'll be seamless. And by blurring the inside edges, I've made sure that it won't be obvious on the inside. So here we have that, and we're going to go ahead and take this into Export Persona and just export this as a PNG. I'm going to put it to my desktop and give it a smart name, like yarn pattern or knitting pattern, something so that you can remember it. Once that's saved, we're going to jump back into the design persona, and we're going to create a bitmap style fill. So what I want to do first is go to the styles palette, and I created a new style menu called knitting patterns. Just draw out a big rectangle and then go to the gradient tool on the left here. The gradient tool offers the opportunity to fill with solids and gradients, but also a bitmap. So we're going to click the bitmap and it will launch this Finder window, and we're going to look for that knitted yarn PNG I just created, and there it is. And by dragging these handles in, you can shrink it and see its pattern and tiled. You can rotate it. A bunch of cool things you can do with that, but there you go. And you can kind of see there's a slight grid, but that's because I didn't take too much time to fully blend that and make sure it was a match. There was some variation in the yarn. If I stretch the square after I've drawn out of the bitmap, it'll warp it. So just keep that in mind. There's a few different ways to incorporate this. You can do the 0, you can do the repeat or extend. I like the normal warp, or excuse me, the wrap. And then I'm going to click off the scale with the object. That way, when I change the size of the object, it'll just extend the pattern. It won't warp it. Once you're happy with your fill, it's just a matter of adding it to your styles menu. So go to the drop-down menu on the upper right-hand corner, select Add Style from Selection, and you can just create objects, click on the style, and instantly apply it to that object. We're going to use that same original texture to create a texture brush in the pixel persona. So go to the brushes menu in the pixel persona and create a new category. I'm calling mine yarn brushes. I know my brushes palette is kind of partly invisible, but from the drop-down menu, you can create a new brush and create a round brush. By double-clicking on that round brush in the palette, you can pull up the settings, and I'm going to import that knitted yarn PNG, the same one we used before, and I'm going to place it in the texture option. You can, once have imported it, you can invert it, you can change the scale of it, and just look at the preview and it'll tell you what to do. But there I've created a brush. I'm going to change the size a little bit. Looks like I have wet edges on, so I'm going to turn those off. Change the color, and there you go. Notice it's just changing the color on the same single pattern, because really what this brush is, it's a hidden texture that you're revealing by brushing. I want to show you how you can use text as a mask. So here we are still in the pixel persona, and I'm just using that same brush with a gradient fill as I'm painting, and just to build up some colors. But then I'm going to go back to the design persona, type out the word yarn, and by dragging the text layer onto the pixel layer, like so, it's going to mask out everything. And you can still move by selecting that yarn layer, the text layer, you can move it around to show whichever part of that color you like. Using that same textured image, we'll create a new intensity brush in the designer persona. There it is, knitted yarn, and I'm going to click on that image, and then I'm going to space out the settings there. That's in the general settings. And then once I've got those tucked in, I'll go to the dynamics, and this just creates variability. I like to scatter the X and Y and kind of bunching things up. And if I was going to do this over again, I'd create a smaller size image, but I think this is fine for now. It's going to create some nice, almost like patchwork effect. But when you zoom in, you'll see that that texture is still that yarn kind of knitted texture. For these next two brushes, they're repeating intensity brushes in the designer persona. And the process is the same for both. You're going to create a black background and then create a white shape on that you're going to export. In the first case, I'm using just a thread scan, and I've adjusted a little bit to make it high contrast. And then I'm importing that just like we did before. This time I am making it a repeating brush. There's an option that you have a stretching brush or repeating brush. Repeating will take and loop whatever your design is over and over and over again. And so I did that. And this time, for the second repeating brush, I'm going to create a little chain, almost like those little V shapes. I'm not sure what those are called. I don't knit. But I'm going to zoom in here, and those kind of repeated V pattern or fish bone pattern, I'm just going to make with just these vector pen strokes. And I'm going to change them, warp them to make them unique, give them round caps to kind of mimic that texture, and then I'm going to make copies, and you'll see that I'm going to make copies, and then I make copies of copies, and I'm going to scroll them all down, making slight changes so they look different. But the last thing you want to do is make both ends, the front and the back of that line, you're going to want to have the same exact stroke, because when you go to export this from the export persona, which you need in order to re-import it as a intensity brush image, you want to make sure, oh, yeah, I got to click off there, whoops. You want to make sure that it's able to loop seamlessly, and that's the trick. By having the first and last object the same, you'll be able to loop seamlessly. You'll see what I mean in a second here. I'll make sure that I draw the box in the export persona. I'll draw the box of the slice to match, and I'll use the point, the inner point of the front and back little V shape as my guide. Okay, that looks pretty good. I can delete that image. I'm going to scale those strokes up a little bit, change the color to white, and put it onto that black background. And then I'm drawing the box, and see I'm using that point on that side and on this side, and that way this will be a looping pattern that perfectly overlaps itself. And I exported it, going back, creating a new textured intensity brush, importing it there, and making sure it's set to repeat instead of stretch. And then here we go, testing it out. Knit one, purl one, and there you have like a little stitch style. Obviously, if you really want to make this perfect, you can spend more time creating those interactions between those little shapes. But there you go. That is a knit brush. Well, that's about it for now. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and we'll catch you next time.